Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. We've got a lot more planned, so stay with us. For those of you joining in progress, I'm John Meandike, the CEO of Urban Green, and I'm your conference moderator for today. Our next session is about transmission. But before we get there, some of you might be wondering how to get your organization more involved with Urban Green as a sponsor of our activities. We asked Jeff Brodsky from Related to explain why, so take a look.
Hi, I'm Jeff Brodsky from Related Companies. It's been my pleasure and my honor to work with Urban Green Council for over 10 years. I thought I'd take a minute just to let you know why I've spent as much time, why I served as chair, and why I'm so proud to be able to speak with you today. Thank you for your participation with Urban Green. It is the singular voice of gravitas and reason in the sustainability world in New York. It is the place where the convening of thought leaders comes to bear. It is the singular place where all the parties at the table come together, and it's where the best information comes out as a result. It's my pleasure to participate. It's my pleasure to support Urban Green. Thank you for doing the same.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. The logical extension from generation is to transmission, to understand exactly how is that green power going to flow into New York City. So I'd like to show you this next slide for a little bit of context. Today, as we look at transmission into New York City, we have transmission delivering 6,000 megawatts into New York City from all geographies. Yet we know that's not enough because there's a bottleneck of excess renewable power from upstate New York that's not getting into New York City. And we've heard about that on our earlier two panels, and we're going to dig into that a little bit more. So we have 6,000 megawatts coming in. We have 1,000 megawatts that's planned of additional transmission that's in progress, and that's good. And then on top of that, there are two separate 1,000 megawatt projects proposed, as you see there, and we're going to get into that in this next panel. So transmission is a big piece of the puzzle. This session is going to provide the latest. So to moderate this session, I'm very pleased to introduce Julie Tai. Julie is the president of the New York State League of Conservation Voters. And I have to tell you, her organization is a great partner with Urban Green. They are doing so much for New York State and so much for New York City. We're thrilled to have Julie moderating the panel. So Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you in the panel. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that early voting has started, and we encourage you all to vote in this important election. It's one of the most important things you can do to act on climate is to make sure that your voice is being heard at the ballot. So as we've heard from agency heads earlier in our first panel, Governor Cuomo and the state legislature passed legislation first in 2019 requiring the 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% renewable energy or clean energy by 2040. And there's a lot of interest, as we just heard from the panel that Doreen moderated, how much interest there is in investing in building renewable energy and bringing renewable energy into New York State and in particular New York City, because that's where all the power is being used. We already heard this year that as part of the budget, the state established a new office and a new program that's intended to make it faster and easier to cite those renewable energy projects. But as we noted in a report we did last year at the League, breaking down the barriers to renewable energy siting, really transmission capacity constraints are a real hurdle to bringing clean energy from the point of generation to the main areas of demand. And the governor and the legislature recognized that, and they acted this year to fold in those measures as part of that legislation. There's a study that Gil Panones mentioned, that DPS, the NYPA, the NYSO, NYSERDA, and several others are working on right now. It's due at the end of the year. That's really looking at this as a big picture. What do we need to do for both distribution, which is talked about the next panel, and on bulk transmission, which is what we're going to focus on right With that, we want to make sure that we're talking about those various issues. So today I am joined by two players in this space who are really critical. One is Rich Dewey, who's president and CEO of the NYISO, or the New York Independent System Operator, and Donald Jessam, who is the CEO of TDI. So with that, I want to talk to Rich first, because NYISO, for those of us who are energy nerds, is an acronym we use all the time, but a lot of people don't know what the NYISO is and what your role is in transmission. So could you start us off by talking about that?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, Julie, everybody. Don, good to see you again. The New York ISO's main responsibility is to really operate the bulk power system, the wholesale grid, if you will, and maintain reliability according to the standards that the federal government sets down. We also administer the wholesale energy markets, which is a big source of revenue for generation projects within New York State. And we have a pretty integrated planning team. And for the purposes of transmission, really what our planning team does is performs a series of long-range studies to look for where the most valuable placement of transmission could be within New York State. And whether that's based on economics or whether it's based on reliability, we work hand in hand with the Department of Public Service, the PSC, and NYSERDA, of course, to really identify where those most optimal builds of transmission could be sited. And we perform studies to identify where the benefits and the needs are, and really make that information available publicly for policymakers and for developers, so that people are making decisions about where to site transmission, where the most valuable build of transmission could be, needs to be located, and based on the current reliability needs and the generation mix, where that could add the most value. So that's really what our role is in terms of transmission. It's about the studies, it's about the education, and it's about making that information available for everybody in a fully transparent way, so that the right decisions can be made for development.
Great. So Donald, what is the Champlain Hudson Power Express project, and what is the role of that in bringing hydropower to New York City? And as sort of a part of that, if you could talk to us a little bit more about what the status of the line is and when it will be bringing power into New York City. And we've heard a lot about this from Mayor de Blasio, about his interests. Recently, the governor talked a little bit about the role of Canadian hydropower in how we're going to help meet our clean energy goals.
Thank you. Yeah, so first off, thank you, John and Urban Green Council and your staff for putting together this very important conference, and Julie for moderating this panel. So let me talk a little bit about the Champlain Hudson Power Express project. So I'm going to go right back to the opening panel, which when John said that it all starts with policy, and I couldn't agree more. So as we were looking at developing transmission projects back in 2010, we looked at which states had the most innovative policies as it pertains to clean energy supply requirements. And New York State by far had the nation-leading requirements. And at the same time, the government of Quebec back in 2003 started an ambitious program to build out their both hydro and wind generating facilities, not just for their domestic market, but for also their export market opportunities, because they also saw the need for more clean energy supply. So we effectively connected the dots. We saw a demand for more clean energy and a supply source that was being built to meet that demand. So if I could put the map up of our project, I could show you, if the map is up. So CHPE is a 1,000 megawatt HVDC, which is a high voltage direct current transmission line. HVDC technology was chosen very carefully right from the beginning, because I can take two cables that are physically this size and put approximately 1 million residential customers worth of energy through those cables. And the reason that's important that they're cable format is we can use natural rights of way, whether they're waterways, roadways, railroad rights of ways, and we can bury the cables, because one of the big concerns of new transmission is I really don't want to see new transmission in my backyard. So we chose a technology so that people didn't have to see the transmission in their backyard. We can use the natural rights of ways and have a very limited environmental footprint in installing these cables and using the best technology available to interconnect or connect the dots. So we started an outreach program in 2010, a large amount of outreach in terms of public meetings, meeting with state, federal, and local governments, meeting with regulators before we started filing our various permits. And we have a series of state and federal permits that are required. And those include the Article 7, which is with the Public Service Commission. We have Army Corps of Engineers, Section 404 and 401, which is to use navigable waterways. We also have a FERC negotiated rate authority requirement. The NISO, we have a lot of work that we had to do with the NISO in terms of being able to interconnect reliably. As Rich had just previously mentioned, that all new interconnection transmission has to be interconnected in a reliable manner. And the Department of Energy, because we were crossing an international border, we had to receive a presidential permit. So fast forward to 2015, we actually acquired all of those various permits to be able to actually construct the project. And so, as we sit here today, we have all of our permits ready to build the CHPE project. So since 2015, what has happened? Well, a lot has happened, actually. Most notably, New York State and New York City have both, when we started to connect the dots, they have actually increased the renewable energy requirements that they need. So you have CLCPA, which is just driving more renewable energy requirements. And, we're 1,000 megawatts in a very large system. So the good news is there's room for lots and lots of projects. But for us, having that base load hydropower, and base load being firm, it's non-intermittent, is going to be able to help the grid overall be able to integrate more and more intermittent resources. We have Local Law 97, which requires physical delivery of power into New York City, clean power, to be able to meet its requirements. We interconnect right into the Astoria complex in Queens, and therefore our hydropower can be delivered directly into New York City and meet those requirements. We have new rules around NOx regulations in the city, which is going to potentially have the requirement of up to 3,000 megawatts of peaking generation have to shut down if they can't meet those requirements. So again, having that firm baseload power delivered right into the city, clean energy, being able to meet all of those different requirements, we think positions ourselves very well. And then most recently, the offshore wind, with up to 9,000 megawatts of new offshore wind being integrated into the city. It's a great opportunity for the state and the city to meet all of its requirements, but of course, it's an intermittent resource. And so we've actually started looking to expand the capacity of our transmission line. Since we started development back in 2010, the technology has moved on, and it's the standard size now is 1,250 megawatts. So we have actually started to study through the NISO process to increase our capacity by another 250 megawatts. And the good news is the actual environmental footprint, the size of the cable hasn't changed, and the technology is bidirectional. So one of the nice things about being integrated with the Hydro-Quebec system is we're tied to the largest battery in the world. Those facilities in Quebec have the ability to take seasonal offshore wind generation, which typically in the winter months is greater and in the summer months is lower, and be able to push that energy up into the Quebec system and bring it down when it's more valuable in the summer period. So pushing it up in the winter, taking it back in the summer. So another great attribute that the project can bring to the market. One of the questions points that was brought up by several of the panelists is the skepticism. Can this transmission be built? Is it possible? Can we get this green energy? Well, as Julie mentioned right from the beginning, back on Earth Day in 2019, Mayor de Blasio indicated that they had strong interest to start negotiations, start discussions on bringing hydropower from Canada into New York City to meet government load. And so those discussions have been ongoing. In addition, we have been in discussions with commercial real estate players after Local Law 97 came into effect. And those discussions are also moving forward, including universities and large buildings. So those discussions have been ongoing. And, when we think about commitment to the market, the CHPE project is going to bring thousands of construction jobs, over 2,000 construction jobs to the marketplace. It's a $3 billion investment in New York. So this is a New York-based energy project that's going to have a large number of jobs, a large number of large capital put into the state of New York. We have committed tens of millions of dollars already into the development of this project, and we are excited where we are today. We are at the cusp of being able to start construction as early as 2021 and be in service in 2025 to help both the state and the city meet its renewable requirements.
Great. So, Rich, I think last week the NYSO issued your latest your latest report on the trends in power market. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the state of the grid is? And obviously, John set this up at the beginning with a map of where the power lines are, but sort of give us some context around that and sort of what you think the role or the status of placing a price on carbon could be with respect to the grid in New York City.
Sure. Yeah. So, that map that John showed really at the start of this conference highlights one of the key themes that we talk about in our State of the Grid. And we call it a tale of two grids. When you look at what the status of the electric system is upstate, and I'm talking, really north of Albany and west of Albany, it's almost 100% carbon free today, most of the time, between the hydro resources, the wind resources, the solar that's going in, and the nuclear assets that are upstate. It's very much carbon free most of the year. But downstate, where we got challenges to get that clean power down into the city, it's almost exclusively fossil fueled. And certainly when Indian Point retires and before the offshore wind can get interconnected, we're going to have a very, very fossil rich generation fleet downstate. So we look at it as the challenges of, how do we move more of that power from upstate to downstate and displace some of those fossil resources to get that carbon-free infrastructure that the goals and the targets have laid out that we're working so hard to get to. The challenges of building transmission, and I think this was touched on a couple of times, is really the goal to not create new right-of-ways, the challenges of getting it sited and really limiting yourself to those existing right-of-ways. And there's a very limited number of pathways from upstate to downstate, and the disruption of upgrading those facilities in place while we do have some projects underway to do just that is a challenge from a scheduling standpoint, because we really do need those pathways to maintain reliability during those periods of peak load. So it's a very, very delicate construction project to be able to upgrade those in place. When we look at the need for transmission, it's not only limited really to those big pathways that exist today. Some of the zones where the onshore wind is being deployed upstate in the northern New York and western New York are already congested. So even getting the existing wind out of the existing pockets where they're getting deployed is seeing some curtailments. And what a curtailment is for everybody is when we're producing wind power at a higher level than the load in that region, we need to be able to export it out to the downstate region. And if the transmission system is constrained, we find ourselves actually backing down the wind resources. So, we send instructions to the wind farms to produce less, and this is really a lost opportunity to achieve the megawatts that we need towards the goals. So we're experiencing those curtailments today. About 3% of the intervals on an annual basis end up getting curtailed. And as we add more wind into those northern New York and western New York regions, that's only going to go up if we don't solve the problem of the transmission constraints coming out of those load pockets. Gil talked about some of the projects in the first panel, or the keynote panel, that are underway in western New York. That will be tremendously successful in getting more of the hydropower out of the Niagara facility, and then the AC transmission, which will upgrade the backbone between Utica and Albany, and then Albany down south towards New York City. So those upgrades are in the development stages right now. They're going through siting, and we expect to have those online by probably end of 2021, and that'll provide a lot of relief. But we're still going to have some challenges getting transmission into New York City and transmission out of those generation pockets in the northern part of New York. We look at one of the proposals that we have in place. You mentioned carbon pricing. We look at carbon pricing as a real opportunity to use the markets and create a market price signal, so that two things will happen. One is it'll incentivize the placement and posture of new renewables closer to the load centers, so it actually gets built in the right locations. Alternatively, it creates that pricing economic opportunity that could incentivize new merchant transmission. And we think that with the support of New York State, that market mechanism would drive renewable development towards these goals faster and more cost effective for consumers.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But Donald, could you perhaps talk about some of the challenges of bringing a transmission project to fruition, and in particular, the project that you're advancing?
Yeah. So there's definitely challenges. This is a 333-mile linear transmission project. And so, right out of the gate, we identified that one of the biggest challenges is the visual impacts. And so that's why we chose the technology that we chose. Using HVDC technology, being able to put it in cable format, that allows us to use those rights of way that Rich and other speakers have brought up. We can use natural waterways, whether it's the Hudson River, Lake Champlain, the Harlem River. We can use railroad rights of way. We're working with CP and CSX Railways to be able to utilize their rights of way. So it gives us the ability to bury the transmission and deal with a lot of the visual concerns that people have for transmission. But having said that, you still have to go out and do a tremendous amount of outreach. And we started that right out of the beginning. And that was outreach, as I had mentioned previously, not only with state governments, with local governments, with the federal government, it's also with the communities. And there's a huge amount of community outreach that's required because of the fact that people need to understand what your project is and is not. Once people start to understand that you're a buried technology and that you're not having visual impacts in their community, a lot of the concerns fade away. They don't go completely away, but certainly that is one of the biggest concerns that people have. We had to do a lot of outreach with the environmental community. The environmental community, as you can imagine, you're talking about putting, as an example, a 1,000-megawatt transmission line down the Hudson River. There's a lot of concerns. What does this mean? How big are the cables? How would that be implemented? And we worked with the environmental community not only prior to the siting permit that we have through New York State, but all through the siting permit process, so that at the end, when the CHPE siting permit came out, we actually had a better project than when we went in, because we had our ideas and we had a lot of input from a lot of different stakeholders who helped improve the project as we were going through the development. We have, of course, our northern partner in Quebec. They have to site their facilities in a respectful manner. So, as I had mentioned previously, they were developing new hydro from 2003 onwards. And fast forward to today, the 5,000 megawatts that they had planned on building, the last part of it, the La Romaine project, will be coming online this year. And that doesn't come without a lot of consultation with the Indigenous communities and having agreements in place with those Indigenous communities to be able to build those facilities so that it's done such that it's in a win-win fashion, and that the community benefits and the projects can be moved forward. So it's really about making sure that all of the stakeholders understand what your project is trying to do. Ours is very simple. We're connecting renewable resources that's being developed in Canada that today does not have the takeaway capacity, the transmission capacity to get to its markets. We know that in Quebec, last year they spilled almost 11 terawatt hours of water, which is 1.5 times what our project can deliver on an annual basis. It's very similar to the upstate, downstate tale of two grids. You have the situation where you have the new renewable resources being built, but you don't have the takeaway capacity. So our transmission capacity is going to allow that energy get to the marketplace and to be able to be used.
Great. And I would note that I know there's a lot of questions in particular about the project at the other end, what Hydro-Quebec has. And I think John Mandyke will announce this at the end, but there is going to be an opportunity where Hydro-Quebec directly will be talking to an Urban Green conference or speaking opportunity. I think will answer many of the questions that folks are raising about the impacts of the hydropower facility itself, as opposed to the transmission project. I would like to, I think everyone agrees, right? We heard it from the first panel, we heard it from the keynote speakers. Everyone agrees we build new transmission. So how does that get done? So Rich, can you talk about that on a macro level, and perhaps you can fold into that what the study is really looking at that you're undertaking with NYPA and DPS. And then after that, perhaps Donald, you could talk about what that's like on the project level.
Sure, I'm happy to, Julie. So when I look at the New York ISO's processes, there are three fundamental ways by which transmission gets built in New York State. First, I'll touch on is economic planning. So looking at the economic congestion, really looking at the congestion in New York State and building the case for building transmission that could bridge from a region that has low cost generation to a region or a zone that has high cost power. With the, quite honestly, with the very, very low natural gas prices that we've seen, and subsequently the low energy prices we've seen over the last several years, the economics of building a transmission project haven't really yielded much investment in that area. We issue a report called CARIS about every 2 years that we lay all of that out, and we look and make available to developers the information about where those opportunities could lie. And our CARIS report is coming out in a couple of months. But that has not yielded a whole lot of specific transmission build in New York. The other areas with respect to reliability. So we do a reliability study every 2 years as well. And we look at what, from a 10-year time horizon, what are the needs of the system in order to assure that we can maintain reliability according to the standards that are laid down. And that does yield new transmission as a means of building the reliability and maintaining and assuring we have the reliability. But most of that is done on the local scale. The third area is where we've seen the most progress, and that's based on public policy. And FERC Order 1000 has identified that for the interest of public policy, there are procedures and processes in place by which the state can declare that in the interests of advancing the policy of the state, it's advantageous or necessary to build transmission. And working in concert with the Public Service Commission, we've identified 2 projects right now that are in flight, and I mentioned them briefly. One is in Western New York, which was identified as the desire to maximize the hydropower output of the Niagara facility and increase hydro imports from Ontario. the Public Service Commission declared that as a need, and then the New York ISO, we stepped in and did a solicitation, and we awarded that project, and that's underway right now. It's through the siting process. So that's going to be built in the next couple of years, and that's really going to help out west. The other public policy was the AC transmission, which came out of originally out of Governor Cuomo's energy policy a few years ago, and that project was also awarded, and that's going to upgrade the transfer capability from Utica to Albany and from Albany down to Pleasant Valley. So that process is getting a lot of attention right now. You saw with the new budget legislation, heightened priority on transmission, the need for new transmission, expediting, accelerating of the siting process, and really the call to look for those opportunities through public policy to build new transmission. So we're excited for that new priority. Our Power Trends report, as you mentioned, has been calling for that for a couple of years, and we've been participating and making all of the studies that we do available to the Public Service Commission and NYSERDA. The DPS is tasked with coming up with a transmission plan that could inform that process. And when that identifies where some of these high priority projects should be built and where the greatest advantages are, we've got the opportunity to leverage that process again. And then what we can do is then we could do a solicitation for projects, award that, and then that would be funded through the federal tariffs that are administered by the New York ISO. So we've made good progress. I think as a region, FERC Order 1000 has been in place for a number of years, and New York has really led the way with leveraging that federal policy and using the public policy, the aggressive energy public policy of New York State to really deliver projects that are underway and are going to yield results, and we can continue to leverage that process, and it's probably the most promising means and mechanism to get new transmission built within New York.
Great. Donald, do you want to talk about this on a project specific level, sort of what process you see as being the easiest, and whether or not you need to make other changes, if the changes in the law that were recently enacted will help? I mean, you've been through the permitting process in a way that many others have not.
Yeah, so it's sort of following up on Rich's three criteria: economic, reliable, and public policy. I describe CHPE as an economic project that brings reliability and public policy benefits. So when we started development of the project, we had to go out and get our FERC negotiated rate authority, which allows us to go and be able to sign up customers at a point in time. And, it's all based on the economics as the market sees it. So we have to find our own customers for this transmission service. But it brings reliability benefits. I mean, we're going right into New York City. We're tying into the most congested market in the U.S. We bypass the congestion, which actually allows additional upstate to downstate generation to be able to be delivered, because we're delivering right into the heart of the city. And as you think about it from a public policy perspective, this is green energy being delivered into the heart of New York City that's going to meet local law 97 regulations. It's going to meet the state of New York's clean energy standard goals, CLCPA goals. So it all helps the state meet its public policy, reliability, and it's done on an economic platform.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about this, and I know there's been a question from the audience about it, but obviously, we have all these requirements relative to renewable energy generation, but we also have energy efficiency that we talked about earlier, sort of the initial panels, but we haven't talked yet about storage and what the role storage might play in changing what our needs are from a transmission perspective. Rich, can you talk a little bit about how you see storage fitting into the mix with respect to evaluating on a large scale bulk systems perspective what storage can be and how we need to fold that into looking at our transmission picture?
Oh yeah, I think storage is incredibly important. for New York State to be able to achieve its goals. When you think about the constraints on the transmission system, and when you think about the coincidence, or really generally the lack of coincidence from when renewables are most valuable until when the demand is the highest, storage, I think, is going to be really important to number one, be able to maximize the production of renewables and use it as a time to offset more of the fossil generation that's so important for the peak. Onshore wind typically performs much, much better at night. Solar, and we're building out a ton of solar, but by 5 p.m. in the afternoon, when we're hitting our demand, our peak demand, solar has dropped off to most of the year, less than 35% of what its capabilities are. So the opportunity to be able to store that renewable power at the time of day when it's most likely generated, and then use it when we need it the most during the peak, is going to go a long way towards displacing more of that fossil generation that's going to be really the target to help us hit our goals. The other element, and Don mentioned this, is the seasonal storage, right? So we are today a summer peaking system, and when we think about what the future is going to look like in terms of beneficial electrification, when you start thinking about the building stock switching over to electric and the transportation systems, which is really part of the broader goals, the longer range goals of the CLCPA, the opportunity to be able to move power outside of our region, maybe to Quebec. Donald mentioned that Quebec is one of the largest batteries in the world. I agree with him on that point. I think the opportunity to be able to move power when we're over generating in New York, to put it somewhere else and then tap back into that at different times of the year when our renewable power is performing less. When you think about the weather patterns, I think that the opportunity for storage will be instrumental in New York's ability to hit the renewable goals. It also is a very, very valuable commodity that can offload some of the need for transmission build. One of the things about transmission and new transmission, and we've all agree that we need it. It's expensive. And it's difficult to site sometimes, and we have limited right-of-ways. With investment in storage at the right points on the grid, we can offset a lot of that need for that transmission build. And we're looking at ways through New York ISO's markets. We're just about to roll out some new market rules that will enable and create a pricing signal that should incentivize development of storage assets. And then they can participate in New York ISO's markets. And we think developers are going to take advantage of that. And I think it's going to go a long way towards helping New York State hit the storage goals, which are also, obviously an important component of the CLCPA and the Clean Energy Standard.
Great. So we have these changes in the accelerated renewable energy bill that was adopted this year that require sort of accelerating the rate, not just of renewable energy generation, but also of how quickly the Department of Public Service reacts to a siting of transmission lines. Do we think that those, having a clock that's really a year-long clock in many circumstances will expedite that? So Donald, you've gone through state processes and federal processes. So do you think that we have challenges on the federal side as well, or do we think that the changes that we made will make it easier to get those projects cited?
Yeah, so I can speak from our experience. I mean, certainly, it's a collaborative process at the end of the day. We worked with, both state and federal governments for our permits. But, in our circumstance, we're 333 miles, and, we wanted to do it in a respectful and careful way. There's a tremendous amount of stakeholder involvement, and you have to bring all those stakeholders in. And, any new legislation that's going to streamline the process to allow, stakeholders to continue to have their say is going to be important. We work very collaboratively with, all of the different agencies, whether they're state or federal. But again, it's a very much a stakeholder-driven process. So, we look forward to seeing how these new rules will roll out and how they will help future developers. But our circumstance is that, we have our permits in place now and, ready to go.
So, Rich, do you have any sort of thoughts on the changes that the legislature made this year with respect to how that will expedite the siting of transmission projects? Obviously, it's primarily about Article 7 projects as opposed to FERC-related projects, since we can't control the federal government here in New York.
There we go. Sorry, I think I was muted. I think it's encouraging. I think that number one, just seeing the priority that's getting placed on transmission and the recognition by the governor that it's going to be so important and central to being able to hit the goals is encouraging. We have, we can't control the federal government, but the New York ISO's tariffs are administered by the federal government, and we have worked through our stakeholder process over the last year or so to streamline the rules and the steps that would need to be performed by our organization in the event a new public policy need was declared, and we think that will result in a significant reduction in the time it takes to do the solicitation that would select projects. And then once you get a project selected, then you get into that long drawn out siting process, which has been problematic in the past. So, the new budget legislation is geared towards streamlining and shortening that siting process. That coupled with the strategy and the goals that was talked about earlier to try to keep new transmission development constrained within existing right-of-ways, I think should significantly reduce any of the opposition that we might see in communities. I think people recognize, the need, the importance of delivering renewable power from upstate to downstate is beneficial to all New Yorkers. And if we can keep it all in the same right-of-ways so that there's no new land impoundments or that sort of thing, I think should significantly reduce the opposition. So I think it's a good combination. I think it's a winning combination. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be able to put it in practice. But I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that it's encouraging. The transmission infrastructure in New York State really hasn't seen any significant upgrades. The changes that are in flight are the first notable real big transmission upgrades, really, I don't know, since I had hair, I think, and that was probably like high school. But that's one of the, Gil and NYPA are doing some great things in the North Country too, and he mentioned that in the keynote panel. Upgrading a line, a very, very old circa World War II line from Moses down into Adirondack, and NYPA is doing that as part of not only are they replacing the line, but they're upgrading it to increase that transfer capability. So even absent the work that the NISO is doing, NYPA has taken some steps as well, and these are all within existing right-of-ways, and I think it's I think it's going to bolster and strengthen the transmission infrastructure, and it's going to go a long way towards helping us hit these goals.
Great. And related to that, folks have asked the question about what can we do, or what do we need to do to make sure that the transmission infrastructure is resilient? So I don't know, Donald, if you want to start with that, and then Rich, you might want to add on to anything related to that. I think you talked about it a little bit in sort of the design that you're choosing for your particular project, but if there's some way you can talk about it more broadly, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So, with the technology that we've chosen, as I mentioned previously, it's all buried. And we saw that, during Superstorm Sandy, that the system can be interrupted due to large storms like Sandy. And so we feel that, we're truly hardened infrastructure. We're buried infrastructure. It's highly protected infrastructure. Our converter station, because of Superstorm Sandy, we were originally at the 1 in 100 year flood plain. We're now at the 1 in 500 year flood plain. So we've actually adopted to make it even more hardened infrastructure. And of course, we have geography on our side. The Quebec system is, quite a distance, and particularly the generation facilities are quite a distance away from New York City. So you have the ability that, hopefully it never happens again, but if a large storm does come through the New York City area, you have an infrastructure that's very, very far away. The transmission line that we built is all buried. The converter station is designed to 1 in a 500-year floodplain. So we're counting on that. We believe that infrastructure is going to have the ability to be very hardened and there for the marketplace. And also, because of the technology that we have chosen, we talk about smart grid. This is, as smart a grid as you can get. It has black start capability. So, you have, again, from a geographical perspective, if for whatever reason our line had to go down because the system was in a stressed situation, we have the ability to black start to be able to restart or help restart the system. And you've got that geographical distance where the generation is hopefully not affected by a similar storm, and being able to assist with the restarting of the system. So overall, we think it's a very hardened infrastructure. We think it's going to be an extremely beneficial and reliable attribute for the grid.
I'm on mute. We've talked a lot about large scale, utility scale transmission. One of the questions we have is how do microgrids and smart grid enhancements play into the transmission picture? So maybe Rich, you can take that one.
Sure. Really, it's so the way it fits into our planning process at the New York ISO is we've got a lot of collaboration in all of our studies to work tightly with the local utilities. So when we are doing our reliability studies, there's steps we take to work with Con Edison, for example, in New York City, or LIPA on Long Island, whoever the local utility is, and we're able to incorporate the changes that we're seeing on the distribution system and try to understand what sort of developments and investment are being done there, so that we can model that within our reliability studies to make sure we've got the most accurate picture of what's going on locally. We're also able to identify local upgrades and resilience measures that are being done at the distribution level, and we can factor that into our designs to make sure that we're capturing in our analysis the most up-to-date information. Some of the things we're doing too at our markets level is we are just recently got approved some new market rules that will enable distributed energy resources, which predominantly operate on the distribution, the retail level, to allow those resources to be able to participate in New York ISO's markets. So it creates an investment signal through our markets and another revenue opportunity for investment in those microgrids, those small distributed energy resources, some of the hybrid packages where you might have distributed solar paired with storage, and this creates another investment opportunity and a pricing signal to drive some of that development, which just makes the grid more resilient. And we collaborate with the local utilities to make sure that we're not intermixing the market opportunities or the programs that are present on those levels, and not creating any conflict with the pricing incentives that we're providing at the wholesale level. So that just incentivizes that sort of development and makes the local grid more resilient.
Great. So Donald, we have many questions about the environmental impacts or people who are questioning the environmental benefits of bringing the Hydro-Quebec into New York City. And again, as I mentioned, and John will highlight this more, there will be another time, not today, when Hydro-Quebec directly will be speaking about these issues. But if you might be able to touch on them to help sort of flesh out what that looks like, what are the potential environmental impacts from bringing that power to New York City, and how how you think that represents a bringing of a renewable resource to New York.
Sure. So, our estimates and these were shared as part of our siting process because, of course, an Article 7 is, there has to be a public need for a project. It was identified that one of the benefits of the project is the carbon reduction. And, large scale hydro and hydro, whether it's, large scale or run of river, it has a very small environmental footprint in terms of CO2. Studies have shown that on a life cycle basis that large scale hydro, particularly Canadian large scale hydro, has about the same environmental footprint as wind today. And so the estimates that we and others have calculated is it's over 3 million tons of CO2 a year, which is a significant amount of CO2 reduction that the project can bring to the marketplace. But on top of that, you also have, as I had mentioned, you have approximately 3,000 megawatts of peaking units that typically there's a NOx issue associated with those in New York City. That can help be reduced. So the environmental benefits are both CO2, NOx, and of course the fact that the transmission is actually being installed, underground and buried. It has a very low construction environmental footprint. So we think that combination, allows us to have a project that meets both state goals, clearly meets city goals. The state's clean energy standard has identified hydro as one of the renewable resources that it's going to be relying on. So for all those reasons, we feel that the Champlain Hudson Power Express project is a very clean project that's going to bring tremendous amount of benefits to New York State, New York City, and of course, all the jobs that come along with that.
Thank you. Folks want to know what they should be advocating for in New York City to get more transmission infrastructure for renewables. I think we should be thinking about that both from the perspective of offshore wind, of the renewables upstate, of importation of any sort of clean energy from out of state. So, Rich, do you want to start with that, and then we can go over to you, Donald?
Sure. We think that one of the most critical components to be able to drive renewable investment and renewable development in New York is carbon pricing, putting a social cost of carbon price in the markets. We advocate strongly and feel very, very passionately that it will yield more private investment in renewable power, and it will flood more projects faster into our system. We think it will also create pricing incentives that will yield more economic transmission development, which will help get that to New York City faster. And we think it will be more cost effective and more cost efficient and lower long-term impacts on consumers' bills if we use the market economics to be able to drive that kind of investment. In addition to being, we feel, cheaper in the long run and more successful in the short run in attracting new development, it puts the risk of that investment on the developer as opposed to on the ratepayer. And we feel pretty strongly this is a proposal we've had in place. We feel we've got good support from our stakeholders. We think we've got a good plan to get it approved by the FERC. The one thing that we have said we won't do is we won't move forward unless New York State and from a policy standpoint supports the plan. So and we've been working with New York State. We've been working with John Rhodes and Alicia Barton and the team in the governor's office to try to make sure they understand all the value and the promise and the capabilities of a market mechanism to drive the investment. And from a standpoint of what we think is best for consumers and what we think is the most viable way to expeditiously achieve these goals, we think putting a price of carbon in the market is is the most economic way to do it. And if folks want to learn more about that, I'm happy to get involved and provide additional details. I know our website has a huge carbon pricing landing page, which has all the facts and circumstances. But really, from a standpoint of what it's going to take to give us the best chance of hitting these goals, putting the cost of carbon in the wholesale market, we think is the most economic, expeditious way to do that.
Great. Another question that we have is if the NISO storage market rules and carbon pricing integrate with local law 97 to enable building owners to undertake energy use carbon accounting into their consideration. I'm asking this question properly. Are there changes being proposed to your market rules for storage that will integrate with local law 97, I guess is the question.
I think that I think the better way to answer that is, are there changes to our markets that will enable asset owners to participate in the wholesale markets, and whether that's a storage at a local site or whether that's a distributed energy resource at a local site, I think the answer is yes. Our storage rules are set to be rolled out sometime mid-year, and I know mid-year is coming close. We're in the final touches of the software development that needs to be in place that will enable storage assets to participate in the wholesale markets, and that can be done independently of participation in any local program. So we've designed these systems so that if somebody has an asset, they can participate in the local program and get revenues from that, and in addition and in parallel participate in the wholesale program. And they've got to be mindful of the different requirements, constraints, and what might be expected of them at a wholesale level and the retail level, but they can participate in both those programs. I think more robust is our distributed energy resource market changes, which are set to come next year, which will then build upon the storage capabilities that we're going to be rolling out this summer. But yeah, asset owners that have those facilities that want to participate in the wholesale markets, they will have that opportunity through our new rules.
Great. We have 1 minute left. So I don't know if there's anything else that Donald, you want to mention before we close this up, or why don't we start with you?
Sure. Again, appreciate the time to be able to talk a little bit more about our project. We're fully permitted. We're ready to go. We're shovel ready. $3 billion investment in New York State, thousands of jobs, labor jobs. We worked with labor throughout the process and have had multiple labor unions endorse the project. The business community has endorsed the project. It meets all of the requirements of both state and federal environmental rules. So we're very excited to be able to assist New York State, New York City meet all of their goals. And there's room for everyone. This is such a big pie at this point in time that all resources are required: offshore wind, onshore wind, storage, new transmission, local generation. It really is all of the above. And we're just very pleased to be one of the projects that we think can, right out of the gate, coming out of COVID, be able to assist New York State and New York City meet economic challenges that are occurring today.
Great. Rich, do you want to have any closing comments?
Yeah, just very briefly, I know you're out of time. Thanks to John and thanks to Urban Green for giving me the opportunity to talk about the New York ISO and what we can do. Very, very happy for our organization to be supporting New York State in achieving these policy goals. And it's good to see you again, Julie.
Great, thank you. And thanks to Urban Green for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm very pleased to be here. I will again, because I'm the New York League of Conservation Voters, encourage everyone to vote by either absentee ballot, early voting, I did it yesterday, very easy, or going out to the polls on June 23rd. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Donald, for that great session to help us see where we're going with transmission, which we've identified as a really key issue for how we're going to green the grid in New York City. As Julie alluded to, just this morning, we confirmed that Sophie Brochu, who is the CEO of Hydro-Quebec, will be my next guest on the episode of Urban Green Live. Urban Green Live is our live video podcast series where we interview experts from New York City and around the world about how we get to a zero carbon future. And one of the great parts of it is there's live Q&A from the audience. And so this episode of Urban Green Live will be on July 8th at 10 a.m. We just confirmed it this morning, so look for registration details very shortly on that. Another connection point with Urban Green is the Trust for Urban Green. And I want to turn it over to a video here now by Silda Wall-Spitzer to explain why.
Hi, my name is Silda Wall-Spitzer, Vice Chair of Urban Green's Board of Directors. I'm also a proud founding member of the Trust for Urban Green. The Trust was started 2 years ago as a way to engage our most committed individual supporters who care deeply about climate change. Trust members contribute $1,000 or more annually and come together throughout the year for special members-only networking events. I'm honored to be a part of this group of individuals who care so deeply about our urban built environment and driving the sustainability conversation in New York City and beyond. We hope that you will make an investment in the future of our city and planet by becoming a member of the Trust, which helps to sustain the critical work of Urban Green. Please join us. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you.